Hello, welcome to North East Culture Social Roundup. I'm Annie Rigby. I'm Artistic Director of Unfolding Theatre. I'm a medium height woman with long ginger hair and I am sitting in a blue bedroom.
Hi, I'm Amy Golding. I'm Artistic Director of Curious Monkey. I'm a small woman with red hair and currently wearing glasses.
Hi, I'm Louie Ingham, one of the Associate Directors, Associate Director for Young Company on the Stage. I'm a medium height woman with a brown bob and a grey cardigan on.
Hi everybody, my name is Rob Huggins. I'm the Chief Executive of Gosforth Civic Theatre at Nebadaji. I'm a tall, middle-aged, bald man with a grey t-shirt.
Hello everybody, after unmuting myself, I'm Cinzia. I'm the Artistic Director of November Club. I'm a medium-sized, I think veering on the heavyish during COVID-19 lady now, with what used to be red hair.
So welcome to you all. We're here to do a bit of a roundup of North East Culture Social. It was an event that took place on the 23rd of April in about 85 people's living rooms, in their spare rooms and on their laptop screens. The aim of the event was to make space for workers in the arts and culture sectors, whether they're freelancers, artists, furloughed venue staff, technicians, makers, doers, to get together, to share experiences, seek advice and just feel a bit more connected during lockdown. Because the event sold out, we wanted to make this roundup to share the conversations with everybody who couldn't get a ticket. And also, so some of the people who were there could hear from more of the different breakout conversations that took place. So here we go. So we had a really brilliant, playful beginning to the event, which Amy from Curious Monkey got us going with. She helped us create rainbows over Zoom and an image of loads and loads of each of us holding out ghost lights to represent the lights on in our theatre stages at the moment, which was really, really beautiful. And then we heard four provocations, four short speeches, and I described these as views from. So views of this strange new world that we're in from four different people's perspectives. So I'm going to take you through those four provocations and then we're going to hear from our different breakout conversations. So the first provocation that we had was from Leila D'Aronville, who gave us a view from the North East freelance sector. And for those of you who don't know Leila, she runs a Facebook group called Tyne&Wear Cultural Freelancers. It's got about 1,300 members. And if you're not already a member, do join. She talked about the frustration that she and many freelancers were feeling. She felt like the rug had been pulled. She talked about self-employed people feeling like they were at the back of the queue for financial support from government. She said, "What is obvious is that the system was balancing on a hair. We were already pushing ourselves too far and too hard." She was worried about the mental health of the freelance sector, that people who are currently marginalised will be even more so, and some might not manage to afford to get back. But on the flip side, she saw opportunity. She said, "We need more equity in the system, and now is the time to push for it." Then Kate Denby, Executive Director from Northern Stage, gave us a view from venues. She set the context that over the last 10 years, venues have been really encouraged to reduce their reliance on Arts Council funding, and so that Northern Stage had worked to get to a point where it earned 60% of its income from box office, and that income has stopped overnight. She described how half of Northern Stage's annual budget is spent on salaries, creative fees, technical and craftspeople, artist commissions and freelance practitioners. This means that box office income is vital, in part subsidising this activity. This situation has flipped our perception of financial risk upside down. What was making Northern Stage more secure has made it less so. So she looked to the need to rebuild audiences and rebuild our business models so that when we emerge out of this, Northern Stage and venues like it can continue to serve our communities and creative practitioners. Next, we heard from Vici Wreford-Sinnott. Vici is a disabled playwright and artistic director of Little Cog, who are a disabled-led theatre company based here in the North East. She's also part of this consortia, who are an 18-strong group of disabled artists and activists. Vici gave us a view from the edge and also the thick of it, the edge where disabled artists are so often positioned. Vici reminded us that 24% of the North East population is disabled, and this covers conditions that we might think we're familiar with, but also invisible conditions and neurodiversities. She reminded us that this community includes friends of ours, family members. And Vici said, in the rush to explore digital creativity, let's slow down a bit and factor accessibility into how we do this. Make sure commission opportunities include new voices and practices around fairness. Take time to include access budget strands. Disabled people are experts in this. They've been doing it for years. So as we rebuild our arts community, let's remember fairness and newness, accessibility and less heard voices. There is magic and innovation there. Finally, we heard from Louie Ingham, who's here with us, but I'm just going to give you a little flavour of her provocation. She gave us a view from one artist thinking about the future. Louie took us through her story of coming to Newcastle to build a programme for young makers in Newcastle in 2017, and the work she'd made with Northern Stage's young company since then. She talked about the qualities of co-creation she'd explored with those young people, things like equality, ambition, passion, multiple narratives, and belly laughs. She talked about being in mourning for the new piece that she was about to make with Young Company, a piece called Where Do We Go Now? But out of that mourning, Louie finished by looking to the future and the big questions that she was thinking about as an artist. How do we make the conditions right for creativity? What stories do we tell and how do we tell them? How do we reconnect our city and make meaningful, magical moments that take root in people's hearts? How do we carry the good stuff forward and ditch the outdated monocultural shadows of the old? How do we as a region famous for being community focused, open-hearted and generous with what we do and don't have lead the way? Where do we go now? So after those 4 brilliant provocations that I've tried to sum up for you there, we then split into breakout groups and we are going to hear a little blast of each of those breakout groups now. So first of all, I'm going to ask Rob if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit, if you wouldn't mind telling us what your group talked about and the main conversations.
Sure. Well, our topic was innovation and digital practice. How can we work in new ways and when should we not? The group was pretty well attended. There was about 8 to 10 in each of the sessions. And really, I got the feeling that people were kind of coming to terms with this new world, this new way of life, and everybody was a little bit shocked, I think. And so everybody was talking about how they were using these new digital devices, pieces of hardware, pieces of software, including myself, because I don't pretend to be a digital master at all. In fact, the complete opposite. So we really talked around 3 things. We talked about how we were viewing different performances and pieces of culture digitally. So everything from what National Theatre are putting out to other local and national and global companies, which was a big part of it. Lots of people sharing lots of different kind of links and places to find those links and different opportunities. The second, and probably in my opinion the most interesting part of the conversation, was all about how we were using digital forms like Zoom and whatever to connect with other artists, to connect with group members and beneficiaries, and talking about how some people had kind of flown into that and it was working really, really well, and other people were struggling to get used to it. The organisation that I run, Liberdaji, is a disability arts organisation that works predominantly with adults with learning disabilities, and so we talked a little bit about access and how just putting logistics in place for certain groups was a real challenge. You know, I'd been in another board meeting, a Curious Monkey board meeting a few weeks prior to this, and Amy was telling us about the amazing work that Curious Monkey are doing, connecting with the groups that they work with, all through kind of using Zoom, enabling people to kind of get hold of pieces of hardware, get hold of Wi-Fi signals and things like that. It's amazing when you start thinking about logistics. Digital is really, really accessible to some people and really, really inaccessible to other people. And so we spent quite a lot of time talking about that. And the third thing that we sort of touched upon a tiny bit was this idea of using digital to create work. And when I say a tiny bit, it was a few minutes right before, you know, as the countdown goes down in Zoom and the pressure's building in a room before you get dragged back to this main space. We were talking about how we were worried as makers that might put pressure on us to kind of go down an avenue that we're not necessarily comfortable with. And I think the overarching feel was we wanted, as makers or as organisations, to take our time over that and make sure that what we were doing, we were getting right and doing for the right reasons. And that really made up, I suppose, the majority of the conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was really, really lovely to hear. It's fascinating for me because I never got to really listen into the breakout conversation, so I'm really enjoying this. So next I'm gonna ask you, Louie, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your group and the conversation that you were part of.
Hi everybody. Yeah, so our topic was imagining and planning for an unknown future. What might theatre, music, art look like on the other side of this? And you probably won't be surprised to hear we don't have any answers at all, but lots more questions. It was quite a full room. I think each session had about 10 or 12 people and lots of different types of disciplines, different experiences. And so lots to kind of talk about. And originally I was going to put them into sort of different groupings, but actually I'll go through how the conversation emerged and unfolded, because actually that kind of makes sense, gives you a better sense of probably of how the room felt. But actually, interestingly, Rob, we started from a place of somebody asking the question about free content, and as makers, how much of the work we have already made or are starting to make should we nationally and internationally be giving away for free, and what does that do, and how do we keep hold of quality within there? And what's the action behind it, and what's its purpose, and who's it for? There was quite an interesting conversation around that, and then that kind of moved into the sector having an energy of wanting to be seen to be being productive and delivering. I think was the energy behind that, and the need to keep relevant and to keep in people's minds, and that came back to then how you retain your business as a freelancer, which opened up a conversation about universal basic income and about how we might be able to, as a sector, help to support existing structures and existing programs that are lobbying for UBI, and what's our relationship with that. We talked about what's the USP of what we do primarily as theatre and as live events, and about the beauty of gathering in a space for real. And I say this now, and having had, as we were just talking about, and the weekend that we've just had, the brilliant experience of GIFT online, which managed to cultivate an alternative space to host a sense of togetherness whilst retaining great work. At this point, we hadn't had that experience as a region, but we were questioning how do we make new spaces for work, but also what might be the relationship that we have as artists to existing spaces and venues and buildings, and how might we have a conversation with the city about different ways of presenting work and making work There's a conversation around capturing the new and the now, and this sense that we're in at the moment of making new friends with our neighbours, having conversations, having permission to engage in different ways with communities. We also then, to counter that, had a conversation about how some people just felt like they were just not in a place at all to be able to even think creatively, that they felt really, really blocked. And that was echoed by a number of people feeling that they were struggling in that way. We had an international perspective from Rosa, who was in Canada, who talked about how she had seen the rise of foreign theatre and arts for social change, and that theatre of oppressed movement, and how that can be used, and it can be useful to us as well. We had a conversation about the kinds of stories we tell, and the levelling out of the playing field in terms of programming and the work that we produce, and how those decisions are made. So kind of the infrastructure of buildings, programmers, commissioners, and how can we shake that up. And we had an interesting perspective from Commercial House about how that's already a really level playing field, and that internal community that sits within there. A lot of people talked about actually the value of the culture social event itself, and how it offered an opportunity for people to meet for the first time, and have a new online profile to say, this is who I am. And then we had a conversation around the very different types of roles that we might all play through our careers if we've been working for quite a while, and how some people were finding the variance between having been a senior manager of a big organisation to now being a freelancer working from their perspective more in isolation, and where to put themselves. So it kind of brought a bit of conversation about identity. We talked a bit about who's at the table, and like you were just describing, Rob, we talked about acknowledging that this culture social was our first experiment with bringing people together, and also acknowledging that there were lots of voices who weren't in the digital space and who didn't know about it, and how we can start to understand that, learn about that, and find ways to make sure that if we're in this temporary space for a while, how we facilitate and stand and sit alongside people who might not be in this conversation and represent the variety of those. So it was not lots of answers, but lots and lots of food for thought in terms of what we do next.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Louie. It sounds like it was a really fascinating conversation. I'm going to give a few little updates from people who couldn't join us for this roundup. Ellie Turner from Open Clasp was chairing one of the groups and has sent some notes through. And her conversation was about funding universal credit and self-employment. Her notes say that she felt in the group there was some sharing of sadness first. She talked about one theatre director had been due to have a show open the same night as the North East Culture Social at Live Theatre, which of course wasn't happening, and she was about to go and direct with National Theatre, and she was really questioning her career and wondering, is she able to stay in the sector until next year, and how hard it felt for the group to hear the reality of those thoughts, but at the same time her feeling like she was being very practical. There was a conversation around, would there be a bit of a talent drain from the sector if people can't afford to stay and wait for income to come back in again. She talked about people signposting people to Arts Council's emergency funds, which of course been open, and the resources page on Northern Stage, which is sharing lots of opportunities and emergency funds. She talked about companies talking about honouring freelance contracts, but having real questions about their ability to fundraise to tour the work when it eventually would happen. She talked about the timelines that people are working to, and I think, you know, even we're doing this roundup a week and a half after the event, and people were talking about a 6-month budgeting scenario, 6-month lockdown budgeting scenario, but a sense that it may be longer. And of course, here we are a week and a half down the line, feeling that potentially is the case. And she talked about staying in, she said in her group there was lots of conversations about staying in touch and how regional venues, producing companies might work together differently, whether there might be a bit of a power shift and hopefully supporting more freelance careers. So thank you so much for Ellie sending those notes through. I'm also going to say a big thank you to Phil Douglas for emailing some notes through, who sadly couldn't join us right now. And I am going to record myself reading those notes and edit it together like magic, and they will appear now. So I'm now going to share with you the notes that Phil Douglas of Curious Art sent through for the session that he hosted along with Mark Calvert from Northern Stage, which was how do we build a community? How do individuals, organisations and venues connect and collaborate at this time? So Phil talked about opening the session to talk about the multiple communities that we find ourselves in, that we're connected by geographies, interests, preferences, lived experiences and identities. And he's collected some of the things that people talked about anonymously. Somebody said there's a need more than ever to find our voice as a sector and as independents, and to find a better connectivity now and for the future. Somebody talked about the idea of sharing each other's fundraising campaigns, as some organisations are really exposed, so how can we work together? Talking about support in kind from funded or more stable organisations as being a real worry for independents. Will that support in kind still be available? Outside communities, some conversations being held felt like they were for certain parts of the creative and cultural sector. So that kind of sense of, where do visual arts or museum staff see their invitation? Does everybody feel like they have the permission to be part of the conversation? Also a recognition that some people didn't feel as ready to talk yet. They were still adjusting to life in this new COVID-19 landscape. So there was a general question about how do we as a network of venues and organisations and individuals make sure people feel invited and encouraged to hold their own conversations. We talked about, Phil says we talked about who are we not connecting with? How do we keep creative conversations going in this time of physical disconnection? Can people share how they are navigating creative processes such as online auditioning and starting collaborative conversations? Somebody else in the group talked about how does the sector act now and move forward better together in terms of decision-making, policies, strategies being designed and implemented, ensuring they include more equity and include more voices from people who are normally at the edges of society and decision-making. Wherever the decision-making tables are, independents, people who are underrepresented and voices less heard should be at these tables at this time. So the group talked about the need for local, regional, national conversations, but without duplication, making sure it was coordinated. What Next was described as an example of coordinated national dialogue that opened out into the regions. It was acknowledged that we are all in a community in a moment together with a shared experience of COVID-19. In Phil's group, questions were also raised about how do we as a creative industry and artists and makers create and sustain bonds with our audiences during this time of disconnection. What artists and venues do now will inform and shape audience behaviours post-lockdown, an audience's relationship or lack of it. Phil also said, somebody asked, how can we as a creative sector learn from the models of behaviour? For instance, the pace of community action, the cohesiveness of some volunteering efforts and initiatives. How does the arts build on and tap into this and those community groups and connections? Somebody asked, how can venues and artists find a way to reach audiences, particularly those who may be shielded for extensive periods of time? And the pandemic has created much more visibility of some of these invisible audiences, those who are vulnerable and who are isolated or shielding. Somebody asked, how do we serve our non-digital communities, people who aren't on YouTube, who don't have the IT or the internet? And an interesting dialogue around use of labels. Many people labelled vulnerable do not identify with this and are highly active and creative citizens. Somebody else said, if the independent sector came into the pandemic under-resourced, how do we address that in a post-pandemic sector? A focus or weight may emerge on grassroots activity and practice as it has more scalability and reach. And Phil's group ended by saying a hope for the future was that the creative community will keep sharing, talking, creating and adapting, and that we can all embrace and enjoy the newness of how ever working in our sector may present itself. So thanks so much, Phil, for sending those notes through. And now you're back, and that's fantastic. And we've heard from Phil's notes, and now we're going to zoom over to Cinzia. Cinzia, tell us a bit about what your group talked about.
So my group was exploring wellbeing, creativity, coping and motivation during this lockdown. There were two small breakout periods. The first one only had myself and Jen, who is of course a Curious Monkeys creative, and she was there as an admin but contributed to the conversation, and one other person. So we're just three of us in that first session, which made for kind of a bit of a very relaxed and discussion about how we were all feeling, what was worrying us. And then the second breakout session there were about I think 8 of us in that one, but we didn't get very long in that session for various technical reasons. But actually, I think all in all, what was interesting was that although we started with our well-being and our creativity, what it really brought up was things that were worrying us in terms of the bigger picture of our work. So overall, the topics we discussed were concerns around what theatres might be programming post-lockdown. Would they return to the safe repertoire of work at the sake of developing new work and new voices? There were concerns about the role of freelance artists and theatre makers post the lockdown. Would there be any work for them? Would there be any money to fund the making of work? And then I think one of the really interesting things that came up, but we didn't have time to unpick, and I'm sure we'll have time at future similar discussions, was the issue of cultural value going forward. It's an issue that's around a lot at the moment. We're talking around on what sort of terms can we express our values as a cultural sector. Is this an opportunity for change? And if we were to look at some of the work, there was also a suggestion of a resource by the climate change organisation Extinction Rebellion and a handbook for regenerative sources in the time of coronavirus, which is called Alone Together. We shared that resource at that session. But there are things that are being done in the framework of climate change that feel very, very important right now for us as a cultural sector. So in terms of the power structures in place now, are the ones we need, those are the ones that we probably need to shake up and galvanise and feed into this so that our voices can be heard. However, we didn't really get a chance to unpack that any further. So I think that's a session on its own, really. That's about it, really.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cinzia, for sharing that. Now, I'm going to finish off hearing from Amy Golding, who was chairing a group with a very, very serious and weighty topic that was general chit chat. So I'm going to ask Amy to share from the conversation she was part of, and also to give us a bit of an overview of what she felt the kind of the temperature was, the kind of mood of the people, the kind of things that people were on people's minds, and the kind of, a bit of a flavour of the event. So Amy, over to you.
Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. So the Chit Chat group, we had quite a lot of performers and actors in the Chit Chat group. So we ended up chatting quite a lot about rehearsals and kind of actors' experiences. So we had an actor who's currently involved with a show with Kappa Pi, and talking about rehearsals on Zoom and how technically those things are actually working and happening. Talking about some techniques of directors kind of setting work together on Zoom and then going off and doing things and then coming back and sharing it rather than just being together on a screen all the time, which was quite interesting. We talked about to look in the camera or not to look in the camera, that kind of awkward thing of do you talk directly like this, or do you talk to the people who you can see on the screen, and how can you connect with another performer when you're not looking at them in the eyes, and how can you feel them in the performance, and how that's really difficult for performers trying to rehearse stuff remotely. We talked about the future. What does this mean for rehearsal rooms in terms of, like, there's lots of talk about social distancing for audiences in the future when we open, you know, when theatres or cinemas or spaces open, that we can sit, you know, rows apart or seats apart, but how do you do that in a rehearsal room, and what does that actually mean for cast sizes and touching in shows? We talked about, is it going to feel like there's going to be more solo performances because you're working on your own, or is there going to be more outdoor performances because you can be further apart from each other, or is there going to be more local stuff like door to door, in the street stuff? So we had just ideas about how we think performance might change. Oh yeah, and just the also about how in the future sort of insurance around although this is general chit chat, we did have some quite serious conversations. Not insurances, but insurances in terms of understudies and in terms of like when you're making work, you don't put in place those kind of things. What if in future, you know, one person in your creative team, oh, I've gone unstable. What happens if one person in your creative team has symptoms and has to isolate, you know, 14 days? Does everybody suddenly have to do that? What does that mean for like creative teams of people working together? Particularly when you're working with a cast that might not be, you know, replaceable overnight like that, or a stage manager who knows the show inside out, and just how do we in the future think about how we prepare for eventualities to do with health and to do with COVID, and how we put those things in place and what kind of budget that's going to mean and things like that. So that was one of the big conversations, because we happen to have lots of performers in the room. The other conversation, we talked a lot about what's keeping us busy and sane and positive. So we had lots of suggestions. Whiskey was one, cheese was another, sunbathing and finding new places to enjoy the sun, like on your doorstep, moving more than usual, dancing in your own space, knowing that there's more people in the same boat with work struggles and connecting with them and talking about that, creating a rap, becoming a YouTube sensation. Sam Bell was there telling us all about her latest success with It's Great to Isolate, having been on many radio stations already. Watching, finding a system of watching stuff. So someone was watching all of the Oscars Best Picture winners for every year, starting with the most recent one first and working backwards. So choosing a way of watching lots of films. Or and running Patricia was in our group, and she was saying she had started a cafe in her house. So at a certain time of the day, she would call her teenage children into her house cafe to have a moment where they could have like posh coffee and cakes and sandwiches as if you were going out somewhere, which I recently then took on that idea, and we made a restaurant in our living room the other week as an inspiration taken from Patricia. There was also a performer from Northumberland in our group who was just incredibly overwhelmed to feel connected, and just saying that actually usually wouldn't necessarily make it to Newcastle. So if this event had been an event that was in a physical space, might not have got there. And the fact that it was that she was able to be there and connecting and meeting new people, and there was a sense of lots of people meeting each other, which was really nice. There was lots of people there that I hadn't met before and had brilliant conversations with. There was a bit of sadness, I think, generally about missing each other. I know I came away at the end of the event and felt really overwhelmed and quite sad at seeing all of these faces in little boxes and waving at them and giving each other virtual hugs and having really lovely conversations, and just wanting to be in a bar and physically having banter and touching people. And so I think there was a general sense of sadness that we weren't, you know, together in a different location. There was some beautiful moments of sharing stories at the end. Everybody on the chat was writing their most memorable moments in a theatre bar or an exhibition opening or a cultural event, and there was lots of really funny ones and moving ones and just moments from over the years of people being together, and yeah, just a real sense of connection, and lots of individual feedback that I had from people. That was just really nice to feel part of it and together. That's about it from me. Thanks.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Amy. That's really really lovely to hear. So thank you everyone for sharing from your groups. Finally, I'm just going to share a little bit about next steps. Northern Stage have sent out a survey, which if you were at the event, you will have received by now, just asking for a bit of feedback and to see if there's an appetite for more North East Culture Social get-togethers on Zoom. And I think currently, although the responses are still coming in, there is a feeling that there is an appetite for making these spaces to come together. And we're provisionally looking at the 11th of June as a next date to have a next big North East Culture Social. Don't hold me to it. It's possible that that might change, but that's the date we're thinking about at the moment. And also the idea of trialling some shorter themed conversations to bring smaller groups together to have conversations on specific topics, to have a little experiment with that as well. So keep your eyes posted. That information will be coming out through Northern Stage's creative team mail out, and also through the social media from the companies who've come together to host this event. So I'd like to thank Northern Stage, also Unfolded Theatre, Curious Monkey, Live Theatre, Gosforth Civic Theatre, Open Class, Curious Arts, November Club and Ballyloren. I'd like to say a special thanks to Hamira Imtiaz, who managed the Zoom and the event from a tech point of view absolutely stunningly. It was an experiment, and it boggled her brain, and she did brilliantly. And I'd also like to thank Caroline Ryan, who interpreted the event and is also doing VSL interpretation for this roundup as well. So thank you, Caroline. Goodbye.